Ohio State faces UCLA on Saturday. It's a night game in the shoe in November. Who would have thought? I'm Steven, that's Stefan, and that's Andrew, and these are game time decisions. These are the things we want to see that might decide the game. They shouldn't decide the game this week, but at least it's some things that we want to see and just learn about Ohio State this week. Stefan, what do you want to see from the Bucks on Saturday?
It's going to sound like something that might decide the game in a few weeks in Ann Arbor, right? It's how much can Ohio State, contain Nico Iamaleava and his mobility. And they've done a good job this season. Arch Manning is mobile. Demond Williams Jr. is mobile. Even Ryan Brown at Purdue had a little bit of mobility to him. But Nico Iamaleava is another one of those guys in college football that can be really twitchy and shifty and hard to bring down. We saw that 11 months ago when Tennessee was here playing in the college football playoff. The one thing that Tennessee's offense kind of consistently had in its back pocket was Nico being able to scramble and buy some yards. And I think both their touchdowns came off Nico runs. So being able to contain him, I think, is going to be important because it might not decide the game on Saturday at Ohio Stadium, but it might decide the game in Ann Arbor in a few weeks, right? Because you know what Bryce Underwood can do with his legs if, Michigan decides to unleash him and not make him a pocket passer like we've seen at some times. But when he's mobile, it's kind of when he's been at his best. So it's not so much a worry that Ohio State can't contain Nico or Bryce because we've seen, Ohio State do it with some of those quarterbacks I mentioned earlier. But this is another test. This is another, way of preparing and, with live reps as opposed to in practice trying to simulate it. So that's what I'm keeping an eye on. If they can contain Nico, that's another thing that I look at for, the game in Ann Arbor. And I tell myself, okay, they can do it against Michigan and Bryce Underwood too.
That's what I was going to say. Like 11 Warriors, they put out an article and it showed off the rushing numbers for every quarterback they faced that was a bit of a running threat. Ryan Brown last week, along with their backup, were the only people who were in the net positive. Everybody else was in the negative, and obviously sacks go into that. But that's kind of the point here: is can you make that threat not a threat in these games? And I think Nico is probably the perfect person to get them prepared for Michigan, for Bryce Underwood, because of what his team buildup is. Like Arch Manning had weapons on the perimeter, he just couldn't get them to him. Ryan Browning, different atmosphere, different situation there. I think Demond Williams had weapons on the perimeter. Even Parker Navarro had a weapon on the perimeter. UCLA has no weapons on the perimeter. So, and even last year when they played Nico against Tennessee, and I know Edric Houston was talking about he's a different player this year, but still, Tennessee, he couldn't get the weapons to the perimeter. Both of their touchdowns came on Nico Iamaleava run plays, like designed run plays on both of those runs, if you guys remember. So this is it for the defense. That's all I'm concerned about is how do they handle Nico in a situation where it's kind of Nico or bust for the Bruins right now. And if they can shut that down, it doesn't mean they're 100% going to shut Michigan down, but I just think this, when you're going to play Ethan Kaliakmatis next week, who's going to throw it around the yard, this is kind of your last chance to play a mobile quarterback before Michigan, who also his team makeup is pretty similar in terms of they want to beat you on the ground because they can't beat you through the air.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give my game time decision and what I'm looking for, but I think with the Nico thing, it's like Demond Williams is a different type of runner. Like Demond was very much like a Kyler type of player. Like Matt Patricia said that, when he was looking at, the film, he saw a lot of Kyler with Demond Williams. So, to me, they're different, right? And I think that's why it's a good test. I mean, the other thing too on the offensive line is what does right guard look like? What does that rotation look like? Because I've said this before. I said it when we did our other videos. I think I said it on the pod too. I think this is kind of your last chance to really kind of solidify anything other than a rotation that has Tegris starting. Maybe it's Josh Padilla. Maybe it's Ethan Anyanwa. Maybe it's Gabe Van Sickle. I would probably rank that in the likely Padilla, Anyanwa, Gabe Van Sickle in terms of the order of likelihood to maybe take that job. But if Padilla plays this week, and Ryan Day said that, they're expecting a full week from him, if Padilla plays well this week and takes over and plays 60% of the snaps, would not surprise me if he gets to start against Rutgers next week, then gets to start going into Michigan. I do not think you want to have this, I don't know what we're doing. Tegra starts this week. He's also going to start next week against Rutgers, and then he goes into this game against Michigan, which has meant so much for people, and you have a new right guard. I don't think you want that. So I think this is kind of your last chance if you're Ohio State to figure out if you're going to make a change at right guard. Otherwise, you are probably going to Ann Arbor with Tegra getting the first snap and then you figure out what's going on from there.
Ethan Yawa was one of the last people to leave the practice field on Wednesday night when we were in here. In fact, there were some defensive linemen in here too. Like over there, you had Caden McDowell and Maxwell Roy working with an assistant. You had Matt Patricia working with Caden Curry and Logan George here behind us for a little bit. And then when Edric Houston is walking off after he does his media, we're watching him work with Matt Patricia in the doorway headed into the locker room. Matt Patricia never stops coaching, and you should sign up for the text, because I texted all that information. 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial. $3.99 after that. Ohio State, UCLA, second to last home game of the season for the Buckeyes, at least in the regular season. I guess we'll see how the next 2 weeks go, whether or not we'll be back here in December or not, right? I mean, you got to see what happens. But Steven, Stefan, Andrew, talk to you after the game.